I'm Jeremy Burns.
And I am Matthew Scott Phillips.
We are from Music Student 101.
And you are listening to the Musicality Podcast.
Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hi, this is Christopher, founder of Musical You, and welcome to the Musicality Podcast. We have two guests joining us on the show today, Matthew Scott Phillips and Jeremy Burns, who together host the Music Student 101 podcast. It's a terrific show that dives deep into music theory in a way that makes it easy to understand, as well as covering other topics like music careers, different instruments, and tips for bands. Matthew and Jeremy are based in Birmingham, Alabama, and although they studied some of the same courses at university together, their musical lives have taken them in quite different directions. Matthew is the award-winning composer of over 70 instrumental and vocal works in a wide range of musical styles, and he is a professor of music at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. Jeremy runs Area 47 Sound, where he has recorded sound for commercials, documentaries, film, national news, and primetime television. He's also a bassist, performing live with 3 bands. I am a regular listener to the Music Student 101 podcast, and I often recommend it to people who ask me how they can brush up on their music theory. So I was really delighted when they agreed to come on our podcast and share their own experiences and insights. In this episode, we talk about how music theory and ear training have played a part in 2 quite different musical careers, one into academia and composing, the other into performance and live sound recording. We talk about the big mindset shift you need to make learning music theory fun and successful. We talk about the core skill that underlies having a good ear and bridges the gap between musical ear training and audio ear training. And I ask them the very blunt question, is there a point to doing a music degree? If you've ever questioned the usefulness of music theory or having a music degree, or you've wondered if there are things you might be missing out on, this conversation with Matthew and Jeremy is going to provide you with some real wisdom and insight. My name is Christopher Sutton, and this is the Musicality Podcast from Musical You. Welcome to the show, Jeremy and Matthew. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'd love to start with a little bit about your beginnings in music, and maybe Matthew, you can go first. Can you tell me, what was it like for you learning music early on?
Well, let's see. I grew up with an extended family of musicians. My grandfather played guitar. Both of my grandmothers played piano. I had an uncle that played several instruments, and from about 10 or 11 on through adolescence, I spent a lot of time just playing with these family members, and it was largely playing by ear. My grandmother did teach me to read a little bit, and it was as these kind of things do. You know, music just sort of became my identity by the time I was 15 or 16. So when I was a little older, and all my friends were looking around, what am I going to go to college to do? You know, I was looking through potential majors for universities, and they saw that there was a such thing as a music major. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, well, that's what I'm doing. So yeah, I got to college. I learned a lot in college. I could read a little bit, but I learned to read much better. You know, I learned much more about theory in my first few years of college, and you know, I've never really looked back. A musician is just what I am, and it's just always been that way, really.
That's really interesting that you started out with the playing by ear style of learning, and it was moving to college where you maybe filled in the more academic side of things, because at this point you are a very academic-oriented musician.
Yeah, I even call myself an academic, a music academic at this point. Yeah. And I definitely know music academics that did it the other way, that sort of were interested in the academic side of music, and through that learned. But I started off just sort of playing by ear, playing gospel hymns, a lot of it, and bluegrass tunes and things like that, and did that for years. Played in bands all through college. So, you know, I feel like I sort of have a foot on two sides of a cliff or a fence or something. You know?
And how about you, Jeremy? How does that compare with your own musical start?
It's not too far different. When I was about I guess 10 years old is when I first started taking an interest. And I guess even before that, I lived in Montgomery with my dad had a guitar, and I would kind of pluck it and make noises, and they'd be like, "Oh, that sounds great." Looking back, it probably sounded like, but they were very encouraging. My parents never told me not to do that, So I took an interest in the guitar, and then I saw this video, "The Final Countdown" by Europe, and I said, "No countdown."
Love that.
And I was like, man, I want to make those noises. So I got this guitar from Service Merchandise, and I said, "Dad, I can't get my guitar to make that noise." And he said, "I think that's a keyboard you're hearing." So I got a keyboard, because at the time the Casio SK1 sampling keyboard was all the rave. And so I ended up making cool little sounds with that, and then eventually taking an interest in getting these little Mel Bay books and kind of learning little melodies and stuff like that. But I guess as far as fast forwarding to high school is when I started to pick up. I was getting into Faith No More and all these other kind of The Cure, some other keyboard kind of bass bands or keyboards in them. And so it was kind of keyboard that I was into. And then the necessity for a bass player came up in the band that I was in. And so I put down the keyboard and picked up the bass. And I've kind of been hooked as a bass player ever since,
That actually happened to me in high school. I was playing in a garage band with my high school buddies, and there were no bass players. So I made my dad promise that if I got all A's on my report card, that he would buy me a bass. And sure enough, that was the one time I got all A's.
I think Paul McCartney was a bassist by default.
That may
I wonder what proportion it is that are a bassist out of necessity. I was the same. I was a guitar player as a teenager until I needed to join a band, and they needed a bassist rather than a guitarist. And I was like, well, it's fewer strings. It's probably fine.
Yeah,
I think it's probably a surprising percentage of bass players that were just, because you don't think about the bass until someone makes you play the bass, right? But then
I think we all come to know and love it, though, right?
I do, yeah. I think that when you're a bass player, once that bass is in your hands, it feels, it feels right, and then you come to consider yourself a bass player, not a guitarist who can play bass. And there are people out there like that, but I am a bass player. That is my instrument. If people ask me what do I play, that's the first one I say. It took a bit, but I can officially say I'm a bassist as well.
Yeah. But that was my high school experience, and then I continued playing bass into college. And I wasn't really thinking about getting a music degree, because I figured I kind of had the same, I guess, misconception, or maybe just preconceived notion that a music degree, it might not get you a very good...
What are you going to do with that?
Exactly, yeah. So, but it wasn't until I took this music basics, I guess it was a intro to music kind of class with Ronald Clemens over at UAB, and he was just so fantastic, and he really started to make everything that I was hearing and knowing what I thought I knew about music, starting to piece it together, give it names, give it pictures, give it things that I can actually make sense of the whole thing. And that's when music theory really started to kind of take off for me. And that's where I really got just completely in love with it. I just had to, check it out and learn more about it. And I felt like it was increasing my communication with the band I was playing in. We were all in the same music theory class at the time. So we were really just, it really amplified, I guess, our growth together.
That's really cool, and I think it might be surprising for people to hear that, the two hosts of a podcast that covers music theory in quite a lot of detail actually both started out not so in touch with the theory side of things. You weren't really book learning, note-by-note musicians by the sound of it. It wasn't only when you got to college that aspect of music opened up to you.
That's very true.
Garage punks even.
Garage punks. I would say garage punks. In my formative years, theory seemed like this vast, quasi-magical sort of almost
inaccessible
tome of things. Someone would kind of halfway teach me what the major scale was, and I would halfway get it, but not enough for me to use it in any way. Much, even though I would try desperately, and I would buy books that, said, well, this is how to make a C chord on the guitar, or a D chord, or something, or but I always felt like there was stuff out there that I wasn't getting, and when I went to college, I think what attracted me to it was all of a sudden, here are these people who say, well, here's the stuff you've not been getting, and I ate it up, like you were saying. It was very eye-opening, and allows me to do what I do now musically, really.
Terrific. And I'd love to ask you more about that it allows you to do what you do. I think, Matthew, you are a professional composer as well as an academic. And I think it's relatively easy for the audience to imagine why theory is important to a composer. Jeremy, maybe it's less easy for people to imagine. You are a gigging musician as well as a professional sound recording engineer and production engineer, I believe. How does music theory play a part in your life these days, or how has it changed the way you are interacting with music?
Well, I think once I got to a certain level where I could easily communicate with any other musician I was playing with, most of the people I play in bands with aren't music majors, So it took a very base knowledge for me to be able to use it in the practical world. But then at some point, I just decided that I wanted to know it better. I wanted to get to my ears to where it was really mainly for ear training for me. And I started looking around for these podcasts that featured any kind of, knowledge, or with musical examples. There's no musical examples out there. How can you do ear training without musical examples?
U.S. copyright laws are the problem.
Believe me, we get into that a lot. But, me and Matt, even long after college, we would go and hang out at the J. Clyde and have a few beers and start talking about, the music world. And there was times where he would be bringing up things and he would just get really passionate and almost frustrated sometimes about some things. And I was like, I want to know what he's talking about. You know what I mean? I want to be able to continue this conversation. So that was one of the things. Okay, so a lack of really good podcasts out there that have, musical examples and actually are kind of maybe entertaining. God, there's a lot of audiobooks out there. They're just dry, really dry, boring things to listen to. Technical, man, you can't throw that at people and expect them to really get into it. So that was the necessity. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but that's kind of a need for the theory knowledge brought me back into it. And now that I'm back into it, doing this podcast, I'm kind of relearning my college education here with Dr. Matt. And it's just been really cool. And now I can speak the language a little bit better and hear things way better. It's made a big difference. And you're in your service as well. Yeah. Just sitting down, doing the exercises. It's always, I'm 40 years old. I've been doing this since I was about 15. And I still learn something new every day. And that's one of the more gratifying, cool things about it.
And being solid in music theory, and yes, you're right. It's easy to see as a composer how I use theory. Playing in bands, and this is something I've discovered too. Is the more you and your bandmates understand music, the less any of you are stabbing in the dark for what you want to do. Whether that is songwriting, whether that is doing your take on a cover that you all like, whether that is learning to play covers that you all like, the more each of you both internally understand how this music is working and externally can communicate it to each other, the more you can do that, the less stabbing in the dark you are, the less time it's going to take to learn that cover, the less you're going to struggle with sounding different from other bands. The less you're going to struggle with finding your own voice, And it's subtle. It's not a question of, well, I'm not going to be able to play unless I know what F sharp Lydian mode is. But if you know what F sharp Lydian mode is and you understand how that works, then you can write songs that are in F sharp Lydian. And
stabbing in the dark is a great analogy to what we're doing when we're trying to figure out learn songs with limited ear training knowledge.
Oh, yeah, and ear training, definitely. I mean, there's a world of difference between, that was not the right note, that was not the right note, that was not the right note, and going, oh, well, he's arpeggiating a minor chord there or something, So.
I think that's a lovely description of how music theory can empower you as a musician, and it can open up opportunities in your music making that are maybe otherwise closed off. At the same time, I think a minute ago, Matthew, you described music theory before college as a kind of magical and overwhelming thing. And so for our listeners who are in that position, maybe they're pre-college or maybe they're adults and they've never really studied the theory. For you guys at college and maybe how you think about teaching theory now, is there a trick to making it less intimidating and overwhelming? Is there a way of teaching theory that means it's not like a big textbook that you need to plow through before you understand how to do anything?
I think step one to accomplishing that goal is don't think of it yourself as a big textbook to plow through. I feel like I feel like a lot of people, even a lot of people who teach theory, still treat it that way, still think of it that way in the mind. Well, these are the rules.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of rules, and they're complicated.
Just the word music theory.
Just the word theory is enough to
It's intimidating.
Yeah, it can intimidate some people.
It sounds scientific.
Yeah, so I think step one for me anyway is to understand what I think music theory is, and what I think music theory is the process of studying how music works so that we can understand why it does what it does. The word rule is really not in my lexicon where music theory is concerned. Not in a general sense. Now, if you're specifically wanting to write 4-part chorale harmony or something, there's some rules you got to follow because that's what you're wanting to do. But in a general term, theory is not a set of rules. It's basically looking at, well, here's all this music that is come before us. And this is what is going on in this music, and it makes us feel this way. We like it for this reasons. Why is that? How does it do that? It's more of a process of discovery. And I think that if you understand that, it's easier to communicate that to other people. I try very hard not to slam down a set of rules and say this is. This is how you write music. What I try to do is say, this is kind of the way music has worked up until now. There are exceptions to everything,
of course.
But this song that makes you feel really sad, or this song that it feels like it's moving forward to a conclusion in a way that songs I write or whatever may not be doing that. Well, there's a music principal reason for that, and I find that that's easier for people to deal with. It's less intimidating to think, well, this is sort of like a secret thing I can discover than thinking, well, this is a whole lot of stuff I have to learn before I can consider myself an educated musician.
Mm-hmm. I think that definitely comes through on the Music Student 101 podcast. You guys talk about it in terms of understanding how music works, and you often start from the idea in music and then work back to the rules, rather than saying, here are the 17 things you need to know about figured bass in the Renaissance.
Yeah, because does anybody want to hear that?
Nah.
I mean, I don't want to know the rules of figured bass in the Renaissance. I do, but I don't want to know. Yeah, because that's a great example of the exact kind of pedagogy that I think can intimidate not only people who are, older and didn't get a music degree but are passionate musicians, but also people who are trying to get a music degree now, and are trying to learn that, saying, these are, these are the rules of counterpoint, this or no parallel fifths, and all of this stuff, and it can be intimidating for them. I think one of our original visions of this podcast was for anybody who is intimidated by this stuff to have sort of another tool, another resource that could sort of help them understand, and we're sort of implying in a sense that we can help them be less intimidated. Yeah. I don't know if we ever mentioned that as a specific goal, but
I hope it helps that I'm willing to kind of put myself out there as not really being all that brilliant from time to time. I'm willing to get things wrong, and then we talk about why I got it wrong. It's maybe a little more approachable. I'm hoping that helps out a little bit.
It certainly does. It makes I think you play the part of the listener in a lot of situations, and you ask the question that's on everyone's mind, and that makes it so much easier, I think, for people to follow and understand and feel like they're getting it.
That's what I go for, actually.
And he's far too modest, by the way. He's much more knowledgeable than he necessarily lets on.
Oh, go on. Seriously, go on.
So, one other topic you covered on the show is music degrees and music careers, and I know that part of your target audience is kind of that aspiring professional musician who is considering or partly going through a music degree at the moment. And I'd love to hear your perspective, because we live in an incredible day and age for self-learning and internet resources, and in fact your own podcast is a perfect example of the amazing stuff that's at our fingertips to learn things ourselves in the world of music. So I'm just going to ask the blunt question, is there a point to doing a music degree?
Would you like to take that one?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a stab. No, I just feel like if I didn't end up in the School of Music, I certainly would not have been opened up to all these other things that I'm learning about music. But I think that these things are now pretty accessible, again, thanks to podcasts like yours and this one. Where does it come in handy to have the degree? It almost seems like there's a certain amount of... what do you call it?
Vindication or validation or something.
Or just, yeah, I mean, if you want to actually go into teaching music, or especially on the college level, then I think that's absolutely necessary, you know?
Oh yeah, you're not going to teach college without.
But what are other
more than one
places
degree.
that you use your degree if not teaching?
You know,
Other than just being a musician, a better, well-rounded musician who can communicate better to other musicians, and
yeah, for one thing, that I think that's extremely valuable. Being the musician who has a college degree versus being the one who bought an instrument and took some lessons. Having the college degree means you went through the process of perfecting your oral training and your oral understanding to this level. It means you went through the process of, reaching, this level of music theory, reaching this level of instrument proficiency. Yeah, and discipline and things. And that degree represents that. And this is what... I talk a lot about what separates people who want a degree from just lessons. Is there's a level of ability there, and when you have that degree, you have that thing saying this person can do this. It's not necessarily that any of those things cannot be accomplished without going to getting a degree. I don't think that's true. You can accomplish these things.
yeah.
Going to get that degree is something you want to do if you want to be a professional musician, and you want to say to the world, I have reached this level of proficiency, and you should treat me as such when you're booking gigs, when you're hunting for jobs, or looking to hire musicians.
Studio musicians,
yes,
definitely need to
absolutely.
be able to speak the language, I would imagine.
Yeah. Because some of those studio people, they want you in, they want you recorded, and they want you out. Time is money. It's not as laid back as some things are. Like.
Not to say there aren't plenty of studio musicians who don't know lick of theory.
It's true. Yeah.
Just do it by feel.
Yeah, but they can sight read.
I think you touched on something important there, which is, even in a case like being a studio musician or sitting in at a gig, even if no one's going to ask to see your certificate and they don't think they care about the qualification, it is representative that you've put in the time, you've studied all of the core areas, and you've reached a certain level. It's kind of a shorthand for the level you've reached as a musician.
Yeah, they care about how good you are, right? Yeah, and for a lot of people, getting a degree is the fastest way to get good enough to be recognized by those people.
Okay, so it sounds like if I put an imaginary 18-year-old in front of you guys and they were passionate about music and they said, I really want to do this for my life. I don't know quite what job I want in music, but I want to be a professional musician. Should I go to college for music? It sounds like both of you would say, yeah, it's a good idea.
My answer would be yes.
Yes.
My answer would be, okay, which college is best for you? It would be a given that they need to go.
It was a great experience. It really was life-changing for me.
Okay, so let me give you a different imaginary person. If we take someone who's maybe 40 years old, they've always played guitar, they love playing, it's their hobby, it's their passion, but they've always felt really sheepish that they didn't study theory, they didn't go to college for music, they worry that they're being held back because they don't necessarily have the music history or music theory or composition skills. What can they do apart from turn back the clock and go to music college?
Well, there's a great podcast. And in all seriousness, we think about these people when we're podcasting. First of all, my grandfather, who taught me to play guitar when I was small, was not an educated musician. Neither was either one of my grandmothers. No one in my family. For a long time, my friends were not, quote unquote, educated college musicians. I know more now, obviously, who are college musicians, but I'll tell you this: if what you want is to have your life enriched by music, by playing music and listening to music, if what you want is to just enjoy this part of your life and get some good out of it for yourself personally and even for some other people around you, there is no reason to feel sheepish or inferior about that, in my opinion.
Hey, and that's what I dig about your podcast, because you seem to emphasize that it's never too late to start learning music. It's never too late to get a better understanding. And actually, when we first started our podcast, I feel like we kind of really targeted more the college level musician. And then we decided we really need to branch out and make it more accessible to more people.
Yeah.
So we're kind of hoping, and part of that effort was to make it more approachable, more kind of like you're just talking to a couple of dudes.
Yeah, we've really branched out. When we started, we really were trying to say, well, this is how you'll survive college theory. But
right,
but as we've gone in, our audience has sort of given us a lot of good feedback. We've gotten to know some of our audience more and things. We've really kind of moved over into into the exact kind of demographic you're talking about there, where people say, well, I love playing music. I don't know as much as I'd like to about theory or anything, and yeah, we try to help them with that. Other than turning back the clock, it's never too late to start learning these things. It really, really isn't.
And do you think it's realistic for someone, if they were considering doing night classes or maybe an online course with Berklee versus using free or paid resources online and kind of self-teaching, how realistic do you think it is to go it alone rather than following a college syllabus?
That will all depend on that person's discipline. The hardest thing I find, and this question sort of touches on sort of how I feel about online courses in general, and online learning in general. What I find is that it is difficult for me, at least, to stay disciplined about learning things, with to that level of coming back and without at least a human contact person saying, did you study today? Did you do your homework this week?
Accountability.
Accountability. Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah, that's tough.
That accountability can be valuable. I definitely know people who are perfectly capable of holding themselves accountable.
I wish I was one of those.
I wish I was one of those people too. But yeah, even if you do some online courses, just like we said, that accountability that, well, this is where you should be at week 1, week 2, week 3 can be very, very helpful in structuring what but yeah, it's all what you want. If you just want to learn this because it's something that, is, you feel enriched by knowing that it helps, that this understanding is something that is fun for you to have, and there's not really a time limit on that, then, there's, the internet is a great place. Go out there and find what you can find and learn what you can learn. And
by sitting down and doing that, it probably shows that you have enough passion about this that you can carry yourself. You don't have to I don't have to have someone say, get on Musical U and learn your pitches.
You're right.
Man, am I going to sit down and do that? Because that's what I'm in the mood for,
Yeah, absolutely.
If I knew I would get an F by not doing that one week, I would probably be way further along.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I have quite a personal connection with this world of online music courses, and I've given a lot of thought to why they work or don't work. And I think I absolutely agree with you that often it's not the quality of the material that matters all that much. There's a lot of good quality free stuff out there, but pulling it together in a cohesive way and putting yourself on a step-by-step course for yourself, even if it's, very informal, a course that is moving you towards your goal, and having some kind of support and guidance so that when you go off track or you miss a week, someone is there to get you back on track.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal.
And guidance can be important because everybody learns differently. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, it can be almost impossible to put together an online course or a college course or any kind of course that just by way of its brilliant construction is going to be pedagogically perfect for everybody. So having that person that you can go up to or email or anything and just say, I had a question about this. I'm still confused about this, and getting that sort of personal feedback can be really, really invaluable.
And I think that's what your community kind of provides, I think before the term snowflake became a beautiful thing like snowflake became such a derogatory term, it actually really kind of encompassed what I think about musicians. Everyone is so different, and there's not one course that can tailor to everybody's needs. But you guys have a course where people can kind of talk back and forth, and they can talk to you, and you talk to them, and kind of all figure out this thing together. I think that really makes it.
Yeah, it's
a big
wonderful
difference.
Resource. It really is.
Thank you. Well, that's the hope, really, is that the community and the team being in there mean it's not the end of the world if you get stuck or you get confused or you get overwhelmed. You have that support system in place, but at the same time, it's a work in progress, and I think we're all still figuring out the right balance for online learning in terms of accountability and support and structure versus a bit more freeform. And, particularly for the adult hobbyist, they don't necessarily want someone badgering them every day, making sure they've done their practice. At the same time, some of us need a bit of accountability to make progress. So you guys started out with a slightly similar musical background. You both went to college and studied music, but you've taken your careers in quite different trajectories. And I think that's part of what makes the show so perfect is one of you is coming from a more academic angle and the other from a more practical performance angle. And I'd love to hear about how music theory and ear skills, ear training, have factored into those two quite different trajectories. Maybe Jeremy, you could go first.
Sure. Well, the obvious things that you think about in music with ear training is just, being able to recognize chords and melodies and scales and stuff like that, and be able to replicate things faster or repeat them or do them faster or come up with your own things. Where it kind of bleeds over into my other line of work, which is location sound recording. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what this is, it's kind of like you see a TV show being shot. There's the guy with the microphone, and there's the guy with the mixer. There's a sound person. Every person talking has a wireless microphone hidden in their clothes. I'm the guy that mixes it all. And when we're kind of conducting interviews, I can use my knowledge of frequencies. Like, for example, the human voice, there's a frequency range that the human voice occupies. So if you got like a really low rumbly air conditioner over here, I don't have to stop the whole shoot and be like, okay, guys, we got to do something about this air conditioner. I know that the editor can roll off certain number of low frequencies. I can use my own judgment based on what I'm hearing to be more effective and show people that I can do a really good job, And also, I think just the whole, identifying frequencies for mixing live sound, hearing a feedback, hearing some like a note ring out in feedback, you can kind of be like, oh, I know what that is. Hey, take your, let's EQ this frequency out. That's where it's kind of become a little more practical to me as far as ear training in my line of work. Does that make sense?
It does. And was that something that came up during your college time, or was it something you learned after?
Yeah, my degree was actually music tech. So that would have put me in a recording studio, tracking bands and musicians and stuff. And somehow I ended up taking that out into the field. Long story how I arrived at that, but that definitely, my music tech degree lent itself to that.
And how much do you feel you have been able to bridge those two worlds of kind of the audio ear training and ear skills with the more musical ear skills?
I think it just happens naturally. They just seem to work together. I'm not sure how to describe exactly how that.
I ask partly because I think in our own material we've always put quite a hard divide there. And so we talk to the musicians about, notes and chords and scales and so on. And then we talk to the audio engineer guys about frequencies and mixing and production. And I'm always conscious that there is at least some overlap, obviously, between pitch and frequency. There's comparisons you can make, but also just in the sense of critical listening and active listening and being able to kind of dissect a sound by ear in a way that the layperson is not really familiar with?
That's a big part of it, actually. Another thing, when it comes to editorial, I'm listening as an editor. I'm always, everything I'm listening to, again, I don't really know how that goes with coincides with music, other than being a critical listener. When you're listening to music, you're recording music, you're really putting it under a microscope, and you're listening for background noises and things that could kind of sully the overall sound. I mean, that's kind of come in handy. But yeah, as far as the music,
there is an entire art form called electronic music composition, which people create musical pieces that generally don't use musical notes at all. They use sampled sounds and digital audio recordings. It's probably something we should get into at some point.
20th century, right?
Yeah, man, it's coming.
Yeah, 21st century, really.
But yeah, so I feel like Jeremy's right. I feel like it's the same skill. Listening to a pitch or listening to a frequency. It's really just a difference of semantics.
A lot of people hear. Very few are listening when it comes to just background sounds and really the way people talk and everything you hear, really.
And that same sentence could be said about listening to pieces of music. Many people hear, very few people listen.
Mm-hmm. Not a bad thing. Just what is what it is.
So, Matthew, how would you say ear training and music theory have shaped the composer you've become, or how have you drawn on those over the years to develop your skills as a composer?
This probably won't come as a surprise to you, but I approach composition fairly intellectually compared to some composers. Not so much compared to others, but my theory is how I have sort of shaped my overall voice over the years. So I will have musical ideas that I think I can make a piece out of, and from one piece of music to the next, those ideas will be completely different and can come from any number of places. But when you look at the style I compose in as a whole, or the sort of my personal voice as a whole, this is defined very much not only by music theory in general, but by the specific music theories that I happen to be interested in at this point of my life, or at the next point in my life, and things like that. I tend to really understand music through theory. I really, really do. And when I go to create music that doesn't exist, whether I'm consciously doing this or not, the first thing I think is what is the theory behind this? Whether this is a piece of tonal harmony, or a piece that is polytonal or pandiatonic, or I could list a lot of words here, but I'm approaching theory from the very beginning, and then ear training is how I know whether I like what I'm doing or not. Without that ear training, I feel like I'd probably go, okay, well, those are notes. I guess there's a lot of notes. I guess this is a composition, but it is my ear training that allows me to say, well,
why would I appreciate that?
Yeah, why would I appreciate that? These are the notes that are doing the thing that I want, or these are not the notes that are doing the thing that I want, and I need different ones. So yeah, my composition is informed by my theory in ways that are so many and so integral that it's really almost hard to separate the two.
I think you described that beautifully. So you guys are the co-hosts of a very popular podcast, Music Student 101, that we've mentioned a couple of times. It's been running for about a year and a half, I believe. And you have a very lovely, relaxed style presenting the show. It's a pleasure to listen to. You feel like you're just hanging out with a couple of guys talking about music theory.
You really are. That's really what we're doing.
Well, at the same time, I know firsthand how much effort goes into making a podcast episode. So I'd love to ask you guys, what motivated you to go to such lengths to create such a wonderful resource for people?
It was all Jeremy's idea. He got me. He got me about 4 beers in, and then said, "Why don't you come to a podcast?"
He said yes, and that was it. I was like, "Hey, you said yes after those 4 beers."
Yeah.
No, it does. It does take a lot, man. It really does. And I think it was just, for me, it was almost a personal thing for me because there was just nothing out there. So I was just going to create it. There was nothing out there that did what I required, that there was no music podcast out there that gave what I required, you know? And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to do it myself, you know? So now I'm kind of sitting here learning more about theory. And in the meantime, you know, sharing that with other people from my perspective. And like you said, I try and ask questions that I think most normal people would try and ask, you know. So
I feel like I really believe in what it is that we have been trying to do. To give a resource to people who can't walk into a college music classroom and learn this stuff. I am big on education. I believe in education as a right. I feel like people who want to know things ought to be able to learn those things. And so to me, I really believed in sort of the mission of the thing as Jeremy described to me, after at about beer 3. But I really believed in that, and I thought this was something that was really good to do. And it's been fun. I get to, I tell people, my job basically consists of me running my mouth about things that I know about, and it's the greatest job in the world in a lot of ways, and this is just another extension of it to me.
Very cool. So I'm sure everyone listening is super curious at this point to go and listen to your show, and we'll have a direct link in the show notes, or you can go to musicstudent101.com. If someone is diving in, you've got... didn't count, but at least 40 episodes so far, maybe more.
we're on 33 now, actually.
33, okay. And so if someone is wanting to dive in, would you recommend starting with the most recent, starting in the beginning? What kinds of things can they find in that archive of episodes, and where should they begin?
I would say definitely start at the beginning.
Yeah.
And if some of the early ones are things where you can think, okay, well, I already know this stuff, go ahead and skip forward. I think... And we're just now really kind of getting to this point where we're talking about things now that are going to be hard to understand unless you had a good grip on what we were talking about a few episodes ago.
It's definitely a sequence.
Yeah. And so I would say start at the beginning. If the beginning is too simple for you, then go ahead and skip ahead a little bit until you get that place where you feel like it's challenging enough. Yeah. The
sequence we're using is kind of loosely based on the sequence that we were put through in school, and that the one that Matt is teaching currently. He's teaching theory at the university, and so that's kind of the sequence we use. At the same time, we try and pepper in some little special topics, things to kind of give the people's minds a break from all the crazy theory, and also just to kind of keep things interesting and cover other topics that are music related. Ultimately, we want to cover as many music topics as necessary. But I feel like giving a base knowledge of theory from the get-go will make people understand more so what we're talking about when it comes to history, when it comes to theory, even ear training. And
to being a musician.
Yeah. Musicality.
Yeah. It's really been gratifying to me personally to get the feedback on the theory aspect of our podcast. I was genuinely afraid that this would just... bore people to death, but it is actually kind of the most popular aspect of what we do, and that's been extremely gratifying. But it will definitely help you understand everything else. We want to talk about the history of music a little bit in the future more. We're just now dipping a toe into that.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Fantastic. Well, as you guys know, we don't straight up teach theory at Musical U. We kind of teach a few cool concepts you need to get the ear skills and the inner skills. But it means I'm always in need of great theory resources to recommend to people. And I am now constantly recommending your show to anyone who feels like they need to brush up on music theory. And it's also one of my favorite podcasts, genuinely. I love listening, whether it's a recap of something I feel I know or something actually quite new to me. I'm a regular listener. And for anyone listening to this interview, please do head on over to musicstudent101.com and give a listen. I guarantee you will enjoy the show and you're going to learn a huge amount. Thank you very much again, Matthew and Jeremy, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much for having us.
Pleasure was all ours.
Unlock your full musicality with Musical U membership. Find out more at musicalitypodcast.com/join.
It was such a treat to get to sit down with the co-hosts of one of my favourite podcasts and pick their brains on music theory, ear training, and music education. And I loved learning more about their own musical journeys too. Although they are the hosts of a podcast which focuses heavily on music theory, Matthew and Jeremy actually both started from more of a by-ear approach to learning music. It was in college that they both studied the theory side of things and found that this gave them a new perspective on how music works. After college, their musical careers took them in quite different directions, with Matthew becoming an award-winning composer and college professor of music, and Jeremy becoming a location sound recorder and continuing to perform regularly with bands. I thought it was really interesting to hear how music theory and oral skills have played a part in those two quite different trajectories. Matthew finds that his composition is influenced strongly by theory from the outset, and that ear skills allow him to make judgments about which of his theory-based ideas he likes or doesn't. Jeremy has developed the ability to listen critically, meaning not just hearing music or live sound, but really listening to it, bringing his theoretical knowledge of music or audio frequencies, as well as his well-trained ear, to let him make decisions based on a deep awareness of what's happening in what he hears. These days, more and more people are questioning the value of traditional college degrees, and I think that probably goes double for music. But as Matthew and Jeremy discuss on the Music Student 101 podcast, there is a wide array of career possibilities that follow from a music degree. And whether or not the actual qualification matters for those careers and musical opportunities, it still clearly represents the fact that you have achieved a certain level as a musician, and you can be counted on to have certain skills and knowledge. So for anyone in the audience considering a music degree, their answer would definitely be to go for it. What about if you're past college stage in your life and you're wondering if and how to brush up on your music knowledge? They're of the opinion that there is good quality material out there online, but there's still value in traditional options like night classes or an online course from a university, not least because it provides the structure and accountability that can help make sure you actually follow through and learn what you set out to. As we talked about on this episode, music theory can be really empowering for a musician to understand, yet the traditional methods can be so rule-based and abstracted away from real music that it's hard to even get started learning if you're not in a structured program like a college degree. I asked them what the key is to making music theory more enjoyable and accessible, and Matthew's answer was, above all, to change the way you think about it. This isn't a dry textbook to be mastered because you should know it. This is about understanding music. It's about knowing why the songs you love have that impact on you, and how you can draw on those same ideas in your own music making. And I really appreciated Jeremy's willingness to share that for him, even as an accomplished musician who took college theory courses, he still finds himself wanting to study it more and understand it better. On the Music Student 101 podcast, Matthew and Jeremy cover music theory to quite an advanced level, but broken down in a step-by-step and relatable way. If you've ever wished you understood more theory, but you felt overwhelmed or intimidated by the traditional books and courses, then you should definitely check out their podcast. I think you'll find it's a refreshingly different and accessible way to wrap your head around music theory. I'm also really excited to see where they take the show in future, branching into topics like music history and more. Thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for our next one, where we'll be picking up on the kind of critical ear we talked about with Jeremy and Matthew, as we cover the important topic of active listening.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's